The 21st Sunday after Pentecost, October 25th, in the year of our Lord 2020, here now, the Gospel according to Matthew chapter 22, verses 34 through 40. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind." This is the greatest. And the first commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Share the cake. My mother had a gifted touch for baking. From my earliest memory, I can see her stirring in the large bowl she held with one hand, while the other whipped and turned the batter that bubbled and smoothed within. Once she had reached the peak consistency for which she had aimed, she would then pour the batter from the bowl into a slightly floured cake pan. The confection now placed in the oven, the bowl with its large wooden spoon set idle upon the table. When my brother and I saw that bowl rimmed with excess batter, we knew by the scent of it that it would be so good to lick. We would beg Mom to let us just stick our fingers in the bowl to rub the batter out. Giddily, Rick and I would have that bowl rocking and spinning between us as we hungrily licked the batter from our sticky fingers. But there was still more delight to follow, for we would smell the baking cake as it slowly browned in the oven. Mom always had an instinctive feel for just when to remove that cake from the oven. She opened the oven door, the nearly invisible steam would rise from it, and with a gloved hand she would pull the hot rack to test the cake for firmness and moisture. She would stick a toothpick in and draw it out again. I can never recall that she ever did this too soon or too late. The cake was always just right the moment she pulled it out of the oven. She would always say the words we loved to hear. She would pronounce them just under her breath, as if to speak confidentially to herself, but just loud enough that we might always overhear what she said. "Ooh, that's good." But that would not be the end of the matter either. If the world took 6 primordial days to finish, then that cake could not be finished until it had been glazed and iced with a topping of caramel, the like of which you have never seen nor tasted, unless you were a member of my family. This work of culinary art would be presented with great fanfare. And even if it was a common work day without guests, Mom would break out her finest china and cutlery for us to use in the first slicing of her baked masterpiece. Invariably, there would be one last piece, perhaps a day or two later. And I recall vividly how my mother provided me my first instruction for moral practice at fair play. I asked her if I could have the last piece, and she replied, I could have it if I shared it with my brother. Already I was learning that I had to consider my brother in all things. I had to be conscious of him in shared work, shared play, shared sleep, shared toys, shared clothes, shared rooms, shared books, and if you please, shared cake besides. Well, be that as it may, I thought it a small enough sacrifice to make of my own pleasure in that last piece of cake if I but slice a very slender portion for my brother. I had it made. I think when I eagerly grabbed the knife, my mother in an instant knew just what my intention was. She said that there was one more condition for my sharing that last piece with my brother Ricky. If I cut the cake, he should be the first to choose of the 2 slices that I made. Hastily, I said to her, okay. I held that knife above the shimmering caramel, and just as I was about to cut, it hit me just what the consequence would be if anything other than absolute equality held sway in my design. Mom stood there with her arms folded and watched me closely as the reckoning began to settle in me just what Ricky would choose. He was no one's fool, and I knew he wanted that last portion as much as I. He hastened me to cut. Go on, cut it already. What are you waiting for? Go on and cut it. I did not like being rushed. And it sure did seem to me that my mother was enjoying my dilemma far too much. She had a slight smile and a raised eyebrow that bespoke her awareness of my becoming aware. I looked at that cake and began my cut from the tip toward the back of the morsel. I put the knife down and realized just how well I had measured for 2 out of 1, because Ricky had to look at them both too long before he decided which he preferred. I knew then that if it did not matter which one he chose, it did not matter which one was left. But this is only the first step in moral deliberation. I shared with my brother because I was coerced into doing so. I did not volunteer. I was commanded. It was my mother's commandment to share with my brother, and by sheer repetition, I found myself to have been shaped by the habit. I was not virtuous for virtue's sake, but I was simulating virtue in rule-managed behavior. I had yet to embrace the art of all moral reasoning for its own sake, but it came by degree. The habits my mother sought to foster in us took hold, and it was not long before the sharing she urged upon us managed to increase the joy we experienced when it was ours more than mine. She laid down the law we were obliged to accept, but by some curious chemistry of character and action, Ricky and I have come to embrace that law and even to defend it too with all our energy and with all of our souls. I dare say with all of our minds. I share with my brother and he shares with me after all these years, not because we are compelled against our will to do so. I think of my brother and it wells up in me just how much he means to me for the sake of my own identity. I am no one if I am not his brother. I am no one if I am not my father's and my mother's son. I am no one if I am not Andrea's husband, and I am no one if I am not my children's father. I have no friends, no students, no fellow believers, and more besides. If I lack all of these, then who am I? Which is the greatest commandment? Jesus is asked. And Jesus' reply makes the next 2 days of his life all the more shocking as the response. For in just another couple of days, Jesus will be hung from a cross. The questions put to Jesus in this portion of Matthew's gospel are intended to trap Jesus in self-incriminating responses the Pharisees and the Sadducees may use to charge him with heresy. They are trick questions to twist Jesus into a knot. He must reply, for silence makes him look foolish, but answering would make him look guilty, no matter the answer. Except Jesus is more trickster figure himself than they are willing to admit. Probably more than you're willing to admit as well. His response transcends their simple either or, their shallow this or that law, to emphasize the wholeness of the law. Jesus makes for them a grand summary of all the commandments as if taking the pieces to reconstruct the whole. Any one law is but a piece that has the fullness of its effect in concert with all the others. Jesus reminds them to love God with all their hearts, with all their souls, and with all their minds. He reasserts from the Old Testament the Shema, a daily prayer every Jew knows to recite. He declares that this is the greatest of all the laws and that the second is just like it. We are to love our neighbors as ourselves. I heard someone say, or perhaps I read it, that the child is the father of the man. I remember my early bowl licking and cake slicing joys, and more importantly still, I remember my mother and my brother. I cannot help but recall that she baked a cake, not for the sake of the cake, but out of love for her family. I cannot think of my pleasure in caramel without thinking of my brother in the glee we shared in our ecstatic Somehow those early days of youth have supplied me the measure of my praise unto heaven and beyond. I love the Lord. I do. I love my God before and after all is said and done. I love with an incomparable pitch of wonder for the skies God has raised, the seas God has shaped, and the comets God has flashed. I love God, and so I preach. I just cannot help myself. I preach. I preach the love of God because I love my neighbor. To share the love of God together, to savor God's love in union of this self with the other. I love because I have been commanded by the thrill of following that law to fall in love with what God does love. And so I have shared with you battered bowls and baked cakes and syrupy caramel because the poet was right all along who sang these words, the words I searched and found because love drove me headlong into Wordsworth's song. My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. So was it when my life began. So is it now. I am a man. So be it when I shall grow old or let me die. The child is father of the man, and I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety. Our God, that extravagant eternal parent, has baked a cake divine. God has poured God's own rich self into the substance of that cake, and I consume it out of love and natural appetite. But the more I have, the more I share. And the more I share, the more I have. I knew that I had come to a place beyond the law when at last I saw a piece of cake my mother had baked. She had placed it in a tin. I took it out, placed it upon a dish, wrapped a fork in a napkin, and gave it to my brother. I suppose this to be true after all. I love my brother. My brother Ricky, I just love my brother. But my cup overrunneth because along came two sisters and then three more brothers, and I learned to love them all. Let me ask you now, all of you now listening and watching me here, some of you I know, but many of you I have yet to meet. Even so, let me tell you most confidentially that this is the law that all of us are charged to keep. Will you lick the bowl with me? Boy, that's good. Let the church say, amen.